I love raised beds. I think they've got many benefits for most gardeners. But one of the problems with building a raised bed out of wood is that eventually you're going to have to replace the wood. It will rot. But a great alternative is to make a raised bed out of cinder blocks. They last for as long as you're going to be gardening. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, and I discuss everything gardening so that you can become a better gardener. Today, let's discuss cinder block raised beds. A cinder block raised bed does involve some heavy lifting. It is kind of hard work, but the concept is very easy. So if you have a short attention span and you want me to get right to the point, stick a bunch of blocks together, fill it with dirt, and start planting. But if you want a bed that has perfectly parallel sides, that's perfectly square and level all the way around, if you want a good looking bed that will last for many years with no changes, well, that's what I'm going to show you in this video. Let's begin by actually talking about the cinder block. Now, it's called a cinder block because in many regions it's actually made from cinders, from fly ash. And you may have heard that they're not good to use in the garden because of those caustic chemicals that can leach into the soil. But in my region and in most areas, these blocks are technically not cinder blocks. They're concrete blocks. There's no fly ash in them at all. There is a minor concern that they can leach lime into the soil. And so if you have a very alkaline soil, that could be an issue. But from the studies that I've seen and the research, it shows that that leaching takes place in an area very close to the block itself. It's not going to permeate the bed. These concrete blocks have a standardized size. They're 16 inches long, 8 inches wide, and 8 inches deep. Now, they're intended to be used to build walls. That's essentially what we're doing in this garden. We're just building the walls that our soil is going to be contained by. I think one of the greatest advantages to using a cinder block bed is that the open center of these blocks provide a number of little mini planting spaces. These openings are about 5 inches square, and I can plant in every single one. This is a pretty big bed. It's 32 blocks. And each block has 2 openings. Well, that gives me the equivalence of 64 5-inch pots. I can grow herbs, I can grow flowers, I can grow whatever I want in each of these individual spaces, in addition to this large open central area. And I don't have to worry about clay pots breaking or plastic pots blowing away because the cinder blocks are sturdy, and what I'm growing inside of them will be protected. Start by figuring out where your bed is going to go. And like any growing area, it should have full sun exposure, at least 6 hours a day, and good access to water, and it should be in an area that you can easily get to. I decided to put it right next to these other wood beds. I've allowed 2 feet of space, which is plenty for me to walk around. I wanted it parallel to these beds, and I wanted it to be about as long as these 2 beds put together. So I began by just getting a tape measure and measuring out 2 feet away from these raised beds. Then I put stakes in the ground at each end of how long this bed was going to be. I ran a string from one stake to the other, and that identified the side of the bed. Then I used a line level and moved the twine up and down the stakes to become perfectly level. This is a guide for determining the top of the bed and the first step in ensuring that it's going to be level. So I determined that the length of this bed ends up being 14 blocks long. In determining the width, I wanted it to match pretty closely to these 4-foot wide beds. So I'm using 2 cinder blocks on the end. That gives me a total width on the outside of 48 inches. And the inside measurement will be 32 inches. still a pretty good sized bed. And not so wide that I can't work in it. Just like these other beds, there's ample space for me to bend and get to every single plant as I take care of it. Putting these blocks into place and getting them level is much easier if you begin with the ground mostly level. So I identified some high spots and some low spots, and I dug out the soil from the high and filled in the low. And using that level twine along the one side, it gave me a pretty good indication to get it mostly level at the beginning. Now, I think the hardest part about this project is just moving all those blocks into position. And remember, I've got 32 blocks. So I loaded them on my trailer and brought them in with a wheelbarrow. You might be better advised to just have them delivered. It might save you a lot of wear and tear on your back. To ensure that the entire bed is level, it begins with the first 2 blocks. And these first 2 are the most important. So take the time to ensure that they're perfectly level individually and with each other. So I scraped away a little soil or added a little soil as necessary. And using a level in all directions, I made sure they were perfect. And then using a rubber mallet, I pounded them in to be nice and stable, again ensuring level all the way around. And then I continued this process with every single block along one side. With the first side done, it was very easy to put in the 2 end blocks. But it is more difficult to get that second side perfect because it needs to be as straight as the first side and level with the first side. So what I did was cut a stick 32 inches long. That's how wide it is in the middle of this bed. And as I worked block by block, I used that stick as a guide to ensure that I had perfect separation between the sides. And I used a 48-inch level to go from one side to the other, so that as I put in the new blocks, they were perfectly level with the blocks on the other side. I continued all the way around, and I finished with the other end being already level because I had taken the time with each block along the way. As with any raised bed, I think if you're going to go to the trouble of building it, you might as well start with some really good soil to start growing in. So I filled this bed with some bulk soil that I had purchased that already had organic material mixed into it. And then, with a lot of effort, brought in one wheelbarrow at a time to fill this bed. Now, I do suggest you be careful at this step because you don't want to knock out these perfectly aligned and level blocks with your wheelbarrow. So take your time to make sure you're dumping it into the center. And then you just spread it around. It's going to take a lot of loads, but eventually the bed will be filled. As you're filling and moving soil around the inside of this bed, go ahead and fill in the holes around the outside as well. Even though this bed is thinner than these other beds that I have, by filling in those outer holes, the total square footage of this single bed is about the same as these 2 4-foot by 8-foot beds. You have complete control over the length and the width of the bed that you choose to make. You also have complete control over the height of your bed. I opted for just a single layer. It's very stable and it's appropriate for the plants that I am planning on putting into this bed. If you opt to add a second level or more, be sure that you stagger each individual block. So on the previous course, wherever you have a joint, be sure and put the next one so it sits on both sides of the joint. That will make for a much stronger bed. Also, if you're adding a second layer, consider using rebar, especially at the corners and periodically down the sides, to help anchor the top level and the lower level together. Just pound the rebar in. If you go to a third level, then I strongly suggest that you consider using mortar between the levels and between the blocks. That will definitely anchor them and keep it very strong. Loose set blocks about 3 levels high can be a little unstable, especially with all that soil inside. Now, filling a bed like this that's multiple levels high can be more difficult. You can't just tip your wheelbarrow in. You might have to fill it by hand. I suggest that you leave one of the ends open when you construct the bed, so you can bring your wheelbarrow through the middle and dump it, and then back your way out. And then as the bed is mostly filled, go ahead and construct the end that you left open. And then you can fill that part by hand. You're also going to probably need to fill the individual holes with just soil and a shovel. That will take some extra time as well, but it can easily be done. The cost of this single layer concrete block bed is less than it cost me to build these 2 wooden raised beds with comparable square footage. The last thing to do is go ahead and put some straw or other mulch on the top. I don't think it's a good idea to have bare soil unless you're ready to plant right away. And I've still got about 3 weeks before I'm going to be planting in this bed, so my mulch is in place. If you have any questions about any of this process, please let me know below. And if you want to become a better gardener, well, then consider watching one of these videos. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.